Welcome back to the reading of The Hobbit on Roleplay Riot. We are on part 9. He knew that something unexpected might happen, and he hardly dared to hope that they would pass without fearful adventure over the great tall mountains with lonely peaks and valleys where no king ruled. They did not. All was well until one day they met a thunderstorm. More than a thunderstorm, a thunder battle. You know how terrific a really big thunderstorm can be down in the land and in a river valley, especially at times where two great thunderstorms meet and clash. More terrible still are thunder and lightning in the mountains at night. Windstorms come up from the east and west and make war. The lightning splinters on the peaks and rocks shiver, and great crashes split the air and go rolling and tumbling into every cave and hollow, and the darkness is filled with overwhelming noise and sudden light. Bilbo had never seen or imagined anything of the kind. They were high up in a narrow place, with a dreadful fall into a dim valley at one side of them. There they were sheltering under a hanging rock for the night, and there lay beneath a blanket and shook from head to toe. When he peeped out in the lightning flashes, he saw across the valley the stone giants were out, and were hurling rocks at one another for a game, and catching them and tossing them down into the darkness, where they smashed among the trees far below, or splintered into little bits with a bang. Then came a wind and a rain, and the wind whipped the rain and the hail about in every direction, so that an overhanging rock was no protection at all. Soon they were getting drenched, and their ponies were standing with their heads down and their tails between their legs, and some of them were whinnying with fright. They could hear the giants guffawing and shouting all over the mountainside. "This won't do at all," said Thorin. "If we don't get blown off or drowned or struck by lightning, we shall soon be picked up by a stone giant and kicked sky high for a football." "Well, if you know anywhere better, take us there," said Gandalf, who was feeling very grumpy and was far from happy about the giants himself. The end of their argument was that they sent Fili and Kili to look for better shelter. They had very sharp eyes, being the youngest of the dwarves by some 50 years, and they usually got these sort of jobs when everybody could see it was absolutely no use sending Bilbo. There is nothing like looking if you want to find something, or Sir Thorin said to the young dwarves. You certainly usually find something if you look, but it is not always the something you are after. So it proved on this occasion. Soon Fili and Kili came crawling back, holding on to the rocks in the wind. "We found a dry cave," they said, "not far around the next corner, and the ponies and all could fit." "Have you thoroughly explored it?" said the wizard, who knew that caves in the mountains were seldom unoccupied. Yes, they said, though everybody knew they could not have been long about it. They had come back too quick. "It isn't all that big, and it doesn't go far back." That, of course, is the dangerous part about caves. You don't know how far back sometimes, or where a passage may lead to, or what is waiting for you inside. But now Fili and Kili's news seemed good enough, so they all got up and prepared to move. The wind was howling and the thunder still growling, and they had business getting themselves and the ponies along. Still, it was not very far to go, and before long they came to a big rock standing out in the path. If you stepped behind, you found a low arch in the side of the mountain. There was just room enough to get the ponies through with a squeeze, when they had unpacked and unsaddled. As they passed under the arch, it was good to hear the wind and rain outside instead of all around them, and to feel safe from the giants and their rocks. But the wizard was taking no risks. He lit up his wand, as he did the day in Bilbo's dining room that seems so long ago, if you remember. And by its light they explored the cave from end to end. It seemed quite a fair size, but not too large and mysterious. It had a dry floor and some comfortable nooks. At one end was a room for the ponies, and they stood, mighty glad for the change, steaming and champing in their nosebags. Owen and Glowin wanted to light a fire at the door to dry their clothes, but Gandalf would not hear of it. So they spread out their wet things on the floor and got dry ones out of the bundles, and made their blankets comfortable, and got out their pipes and blew smoke rings, which Gandalf turned into different colors, and set dancing upon the roof to amuse them. They talked and forgot about the storm, and discussed what each would do with their share of the treasure, when they got it, which at the moment did not seem so impossible. And so they dropped off to sleep one by one. And that was the last time they used the ponies, packages, baggages, tools, and paraphernalia that they had brought with them. It turned out a good thing that night that they had brought little Bilbo with them after all, for somehow he could not go to sleep for a long while. And when he did sleep, it was very nasty dreams. He dreamed that a crack on the wall at the back of the cave got bigger and bigger, and opened wider and wider, and he was very afraid, but he could not call out or do anything but lie and look. Then he dreamed that the floor of the cave was giving way, and he was slipping, beginning to fall down, goodness knows where to. At that he woke up with a terrible start, and found that part of his dream was true. A crack had opened at the back of the cave, and was already a wide passage. He was just in time to see the last of the ponies' tails disappearing into it. Of course he gave a very loud yell, loud a yell as a hobbit can give, which is surprising for their size. Out jumped the goblins, big goblins, great ugly-looking goblins, lots of goblins, before you could say rocks and blocks. There were 6 to each dwarf, at least 2 even for Bilbo, and they all got grabbed and carried through the crack before you could say tinder and flint. But not Gandalf. Bilbo's yell had done that much good. It had wakened him up in the splintered second when the goblins came to grab him. There was a terrific flash like lightning in the cave, a smell like gunpowder, and several of them fell dead. The crack closed with a snap, and Bilbo and the dwarves were on the wrong side of it. Where was Gandalf? Of that they nor the goblins had any idea, and the goblins did not wait to find out. They seized Bilbo and the dwarves and hurried them along. It was deep, deep, dark, such as only goblins have taken to living in the heart of the mountains can see through. The passages there were crossed and tangled in all direction, but the goblins knew their way, as well as you know to the nearest post office. And they went down, and it was most horribly stuffy. The goblins were very rough, and pinched unmercifully, and chuckled and laughed in their horrible, stony voices. And Bilbo was more unhappy than ever that the troll had picked him up, even more unhappy than when the troll had picked him up by his toes. He wished again that for his nice, bright hobbit hole, not for the last time. Now came a glimmer of a red light before them. The goblins began to sing or croak, keeping time with the flap of their feet on the stone, shaking their prisoners as well. Clap, snap, the black crack, grip, grab, pinch, nab, and down to Goblin Town you go, my lad. Crash, 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 smash, hammer and tongs, knocker and gongs, pound, pound far underground, ho ho, my lad. Swish, smack, whip, crack, Batter and bleat, yammer and bleat. Work, work, nor dare to shirk, while goblins quaff, quaff, and goblins laugh. Round and round, far underground, below, my lad, ha ha! It was truly terrifying. The walls echoed clap and snap and crush and smash, and to the ugly laughter of their ho ho, my lad. The general meaning of the song was only too plain, for now the goblins took out whips and whipped them with a swish, smack, and set them running as fast as they could in front of them, and more than one of the dwarves were already yammering and bleeding like anything, when they stumbled into a big cavern. It was lit by a great red fire in the middle, and by torches along the walls, and it was full of goblins. They all laughed and stamped and clapped their hands when the dwarves, with poor little Bilbo at the back nearest to the whips, came running in, while the goblin drivers whooped and cracked their whips behind. The ponies were already here, huddled in the corner, and they were all their baggages and packages lying broken open, being rummaged by the goblins, and smelt by goblins, and fingered by goblins, and quarreled over by goblins. I am afraid that was the last they ever saw of those excellent little ponies, including a jolly, sturdy little white fellow that Elrond had lent to Gandalf, since his horse was not suitable for the mountain paths. For goblins eat horses and ponies and donkeys and much more dreadful things, and they are always hungry. Just now, however, the prisoners were thinking only of themselves. The goblins chained their hands behind their backs and linked them all together in a line and dragged them to the far end of the cavern, with little Bilbo tugging at the end of the row. There in the shadows on the large flat stone sat a tremendous goblin with a huge head, and armed goblins were standing around him, carrying the axes and bent swords that they use. Now goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they make many clever ones. They can tunnel and mine as well as any, but the most skilled dwarves, when they take the trouble, though, are usually untidy and dirty. Hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and other instruments of torture they make very well, and get other people to make their designs, prisoners and slaves that have to work till they die for want of air and light. It is not unlikely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large number of people at once. For wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them, and also not working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days, in those wild parts, they had not advanced, as it is called, so far. They did not hate dwarves especially, no more than they hated everybody and everything, and particularly the orderly and prosperous. In some parts wicked dwarves, and even made alliances with them. But they had a special grudge against Thorin's people, because of the war which you had heard mentioned, but which does not come into this tale. And anyway, goblins don't care who they catch, as long as it is done smart and in secret, and the prisoners are not able to defend themselves. "Who are these miserable persons?" said the great goblin. "Dwarves, and this," said the drivers, pulling at Bilbo's chain so that he fell forward on his knees. "We found them sheltering in our front porch." "What do you mean by it?" said the great goblin, turning to Thorin. "Up to no good, I'll warrant. Spying on the private business of my people, I guess. Thieves, I shouldn't be surprised to learn. Murderers and friends of elves, not unlikely. Come, what have you got to say?" "Thorin, of the dwarves at your service," he replied. It was merely a polite nothing. "Of these things which you suspect and imagine, we had no idea. We sheltered from a storm in what seemed a convenient cave and unused. Nothing was further from our thoughts than inconveniencing goblins in any way whatsoever." That was true enough. Said the great goblin. So you say. Might I ask what you were doing up in the mountains at all? And where you were coming from? And where you were going to? In fact, I should like to know all about you. Not that it will do you much good. For an oaken shield. I know too much about your folk already. But let's have the truth, or I'll prepare something particularly uncomfortable for you. And if you want to hear what happens to the dwarves, tune in for part 10. Thank you for watching Roleplay Riot.